Who's going to be our next speaker?
Okay. That one, yeah. Mm-hmm. Hi, everyone. My name's Brianna Winder-Patel, and I'm going to be talking about anxiety in individuals with ASD and impaired intellectual functioning. So the data that I'm going to talk about comes from the Autism Phenome Project. This is a large longitudinal study with the goal of gathering biological and behavioral information on a large number of families affected by ASD in order to define clinically meaningful subtypes of ASD. They come in between the ages 2 and 3.5, and they have multiple time points before they reach our current time point, which is the middle childhood time point. They're right now between ages 9 to 12 years when they come in. The PIs on this phase of the APP are David Amaral, Christine Nordahl, and Marjorie Solomon. And at the middle childhood time point, we have a particular goal of determining if there are patterns of brain development or genetics that predict those with anxiety or with autism and anxiety disorders. And so right now, we're in the middle of this phase. We have over a year to go, I believe. We've collected all of the data for 88 participants in the ASD group and 60 in the typical developing group. And what I'm going to talk about specifically, there are 33 participants in the ASD group whose IQ scores were below 70. So the DAS, general cognitive ability mean, was 43 for this group, and the verbal mean was 33. So I'm going to focus in on these participants. We, with every parent that comes in as part of this study, we do the Anxiety Disorders Interview Schedule, the ADIS, with the Autism Spectrum Addendum that was developed by Connor Kearns. She's a consultant on this study. And so this table is really about the number of anxiety diagnoses. It's not by participant. So some participants have more than one diagnosis. So in this group, we made 35 anxiety diagnoses. And if you see the breakdown here, we consider traditional anxiety as DSM anxiety. So there were 16 diagnoses that we made that had traditional anxiety. Most common was specific phobia. And then there's the distinct anxiety disorders, and these are the ones that are in the Autism Spectrum Addendum. And things like social fear, which is fear without fear of negative evaluation, uncommon or unusual phobias, special interest fears, anxiety about access to their special interest. Fear of change is worry or anxiety related to changes in the routine or going to new places or changes in their schedule, and ambiguous OCD. So you can see in terms of the anxiety diagnoses that we made, specific phobia was the most common, followed by fear of change, and then uncommon phobia, and then some of these other areas as well. And then if you look at this by participant, so in this group, as I mentioned in the beginning, there were 33 participants with IQs below 70. 22 of them we found had clinically significant anxiety. So they met criteria for at least one of these anxiety disorders based on the ADIS interview. So that's 67%. And I will note that not a single one of them had been told previously that by any doctor or physician that they had an anxiety disorder prior to just coming in as this round of a longitudinal study. So 7 in this sample had only traditional anxiety, so those DSM-5 anxiety diagnoses. 8 had both traditional and distinct areas of anxiety, and 7 participants had distinct areas of anxiety only. So then, a big question when we started this was, how are we going to figure this out? Because as many of you know, most of the questionnaires and the interviews are based on, verbal report of anxiety. And the majority of the individuals in this sample were nonverbal, and we were doing the parent interview. So a lot of the prompts in the ADIS say things like, does he tell you? So we really had to focus with parents on, has he indicated, have you observed this? Or show me what it would look like. So I sometimes ask parents to actually act out what their child would look like in these situations to try to understand if we have a clear indication of anxiety. And we look to the literature to try to think of what are all the possible behavioral examples that we could be asking parents about, and we could be looking to see if they exhibit these behaviors. And I particularly want to focus on fight, flight, and self-injurious behavior. So out of this list, if I think of the three that I just mentioned, they're the ones that in a lot of ways could potentially be the most dangerous. And so if we think about fight behavior, it could be aggression, hitting people, biting people. Flight could be eloping or running out of a building or situation. And then self-injurious behavior takes multiple forms, but hurting themselves or doing something to themselves. And so out of the sample, there were 8 participants out of the 22 that exhibited fight behavior from the qualitative descriptions of the parents, 8 that exhibited flight behavior, and 7 that exhibited self-injurious behavior, and 6 that didn't exhibit any of these symptoms of anxiety, but other symptoms that allowed us to make the diagnoses. And so for an example would be, for fight behavior, the child was fighting against and bit a staff member at a dental office before the dental procedure began, just as one example of one of our participants. For flight behavior, a child looked scared and eloped out of the classroom. And this happened when he knew that they were going to start this Columbia Pictures trailer, which is a long-term uncommon phobia for this child. And he ran out of the classroom and almost made it out of the school. And in terms of self-injurious behavior, a child looks anxious, bites his hand, and bangs his head when he is around babies who might screech with joy or cry. And another uncommon phobia. So we tended to see this behavior a lot related to the phobias. But then there are these other behavioral manifestations of anxiety, and some I've recorded here. For separation anxiety disorder, we had a report that one child was pacing or engaging in self-injurious behavior right when their parents put their shoes on. So that was the kind of main symptom, and then of course we have to do lots of interviewing and lots of questions to collect enough information to know that it really fits into this area. Stands at the window or door throughout the day looking distressed. One child did this for the entire day at the daycare or the daycare babysitter program that he was in. Carries the family photo around and appears anxious or scared when the parent is not present. So he would just find this photo and carry it with him looking scared. Another child checked for her mom's handbag, that it was in the house and that the car was in the garage, and she sat in the part of the house where she could conduct these head counts of the family members. We had to do a lot of work to really figure out if this was related to OCD versus separation, and we determined that it really seemed like it was a reassurance behavior for her to do this and related to the separation anxiety, and requesting a schedule often when separated. So in terms of ambiguous social fear, so that's this distinct area of anxiety in Connor's autism spectrum addendum, and that's fear of, in social situations when you don't have indication that fear of negative evaluation is present. So we saw a lot of kind of hiding behaviors. So carrying a blanket around to cover his head. He would carry it out in public and only put the blanket around when he was around people he didn't know. We have a lot of questions about sensory sensitivity, so we try to make sure that it's not that, and it really is related to the people, and there's other signs of anxiety. Requesting a stroller before going out in public to hide from people, and facing a wall when people talk to him. This was a 10-year-old that was still using a stroller in public. Not wanting to leave the house, even for preferred activities. And after asking many, many questions, we determined it was really related to the people that he would have to encounter if he left the house. Repetitively asking for comfort items. So one child was very comforted by French fries, loved French fries, but he had just had French fries, and if he was around people, he would ask for them repetitively from his dad and look very distressed. And then in terms of fear of change, this area of distinct anxiety where there's worry about changes in events or in newness, like going new places or meeting, new people. Some examples were refusing to walk into a new space and requesting a wagon and a blanket to go in. Anytime they went somewhere new, she appeared really, really anxious, and they had to bring a wagon in the car, and they got into this pattern of keeping this wagon in this blanket so she could go into the new place. One mom reported that her child looked as if someone was skinning her alive if they tried to take her into a new building or place. So again, many more questions to determine if this was related to fear of change. One child was requesting an iPad to be led into the building while watching it to help reduce anxiety. So she really wanted her parent to hold it and kind of be distracted by it and lead her into the building. And if she made it into the building, she could regulate a little bit and calm down. And providing high levels of preparing and priming. Parents talk about a lot about this with fear of change for any change in schedule with still continued high anxiety, even though parents are doing so much to prepare their children for new events or changes in their schedules. So in summary, if we consider just DSM-5 anxiety diagnoses, more than half of the anxiety diagnoses would not have been detected in this sample. Specific phobia was the most common anxiety diagnosis, followed by fear of change and uncommon phobia. There's really this focus on observations of behavior and descriptions of behavior that are necessary if you don't have the verbal information to rely on to conduct this interview and make your diagnoses. Fight, flight, and self-injurious behavior were among the most dangerous, in just, thinking about the potential and the things that we heard parents report related to these behaviors. And they occurred in 32 to 36% of those with significant anxiety. And, identifying the underlying function of these behaviors, that it is anxiety, it's often overlooked. And it's really important for treatment planning. We heard parents talking a lot about how aggression was being treated with medication, but it didn't seem like anyone had quite thought about that the aggression was specifically related to being in that anxious situation. So it's really the anxiety was causing kind of fight behavior. And so the treatment planning and what's decided in terms of behavioral and pharmacological treatment is sometimes, missing the fact that anxiety might be underneath that. And we have a lot more information on this topic that'll be covered in a poster session on Saturday. And that sort of gives you a much more broad sense of this whole sample in the range. Okay.
Thank you so much for that. That is a really important